Welcome to Your Corporate Shrink podcast. You can engineer human and you can engineer leaders. Here on Your Corporate Shrink, join Elizabeth Frisch, a corporate fixer with a heart of gold, a wicked sense of humor, and a passion to solve pervasive business problems permanently. We will dive into the real issues and opportunities facing companies and government agencies today. Let's get started helping you engineer leaders.
Welcome, everyone, to You Can't Engineer Human. I am your host, Elizabeth Frisch. Yes, the recovering chemical engineer. Welcome, everyone, to today's call. I'm super excited because we have Richard Lindner, who is the president and co-founder of DigitalMarketer, and he's an industry leader in global marketing education, as well as happens to be incredibly, amazingly fantastic at getting folks to achieve all their goals. And so, of course, our call topic today is, are you designed to fail? Because as some of you have listened to other podcasts know, there's 12 areas that you can sink your organization, and goals are one of them. And Richard, who I have been in every classroom he's ever taught in the last 5 years, simply because I've been so impressed with how he leads his team. And of course, he's really good at leadership education also. So with that, Richard, welcome to the call.
Wow. Well, thank you, one. And two, I hope I can live up to that stellar introduction. So I'm very happy to be here. And while those words would be incredibly humbling by most normal humans, they mean so much more coming from you. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, and thank you for being here. And one of the reasons why I love this call is you are CEO of an organization. So you are living this, you are walking this, you aren't just talking about it. And that's the magic on this show. And so one of the things I wanted to kick off with is a lot of people have been asking the question, how does a 126-year-old organization fail, right? You know, we're not surprised when they say 99% of small businesses fail and startups fail, but how does a 126-year-old organization fail? And what was fascinating to me was whether I read Forbes or a Harvard Business Review or any of those articles, there seemed to be this big focus on the complete paralysis around goal setting. And so I would really love you to talk about DM's story and path around goal setting, because you as an organization and under your leadership, that organization has been able to rapidly grow and scale in so many areas. And of course, we are totally straight on this call, so I would love to hear what failed miserably. And, you know, and then we'll flip over to the what's really working. What are the things that you tried? Because I know listeners are going to understand and hear some of what you share and what you are talking about around goals.
Yeah. So I think kind of to go to your first point, you know, what happens when, you know, this legacy company fails, and how do they fail, and how does that around goals is, as cliche as it sounds, I think it's a resistance to change is one thing. I mean, I think at some point, if you don't have fresh leadership, or at least freedom to say, you know, this is what we're going to do that is kind of tried and true or controls, and then this is what we're going to do that is kind of for the future to see what we do need to change, then you're going to kind of get what you get, and it's going to be depreciating, right? You're going to put forth the same or more effort to get the same or less results. And I think that's a trap that tends to hit kind of corporate America more than kind of scrappy startups or entrepreneurial companies, because the other pitfall of a lot of corporate America falls into is, best case scenario, I try something new and I don't get yelled at, right? The reward system for corporate America is really screwed up. If I don't do what I'm supposed to do, I get yelled at. If I do something new and it works, maybe I don't get yelled at. If I do something new and it doesn't work, I get yelled at and told to do things the way we've always done them. So I think there's this resistance to change that is also not just keeping organizations from growing and kind of transforming into our new reality, but it's also causing good people to leave. It's causing good ideas to just die. And it's kind of slapping the hand of those who step up and want to change and want to do something differently. So I think that's a big problem that when you see these large corporations that are starting to fail, whether it's industry specific or not. I mean, there are plenty of organizations that aren't newspapers or magazines or traditional, department stores or big box retailers or heck, movie rental. Yeah, remember when those were a thing?
Oh yeah, that
Movie rental. I think as of right now, one Blockbuster video left in all of existence. It was two until like 3 months ago. But it's not just disruption by technology or by massive change. It's the lack of internal disruption that is causing organizations to kind of fail. And I think resistance to change is a big deal there. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, and I was going to say, one of the things that helps counteract that resistance to change is unlearning how we've been taught to set goals. And I would love you to talk about the whole phenomenon. I see it all the time. I'll come in with an organization and they'll say, I'm not hitting my goals. And it's interesting. I'll look at the goals and they have a right to be upset. They're tiny, minor little goals. Yet you look and go, well, why aren't they hitting even those goals? And there's that thing we were taught of, to your point, in corporate America, resistance to change. I'm only going to say we're going to hit 10%, because if I hit 10%, the worst that's going to happen is they won't even say anything at all. The best that's going to happen, I keep my job and maybe get a little bonus or a raise. So what do you think about that kind of dynamic in relation to goal setting?
So for us, one of the kind of unwritten laws here at DigitalMarketer is we set goals large enough so that if and when we fail, there'll still be reason to celebrate. Right? I mean, that's kind of a litmus test. It's something for us to check against and to make sure, like, is this a worthy goal? What is the the total maximum potential impact achieving this goal could have on our business, on our mission, on whatever it is, and if it's something that doesn't both scare and excite you, then I mean, it's maybe oversimplified, but for us, if it's not scary and exciting, then it's probably not a good goal. If it's not scary and exciting and doesn't have an impact on our business or take a big chunk out of our mission, then it's probably not a big goal. But with that, we kind of do say, if we're going to set a goal, and we've all been taught the SMART acronym our entire lives. I love and hate that acronym.
I know.
I love that I was in my daughter's, I think it was third or fourth, it's been a couple of years, third or fourth grade class. And we went in and they were teaching the kids that acronym, and they helped them set goals monthly based on that. I thought that was fantastic. It's sad that we still have to teach ourselves that as grownups and as professionals and especially as executives. But we do. I mean, they need to be SMART goals. They need to be measurable goals. And as we go into it, we say, the litmus test for our goals, is it in line with our mission, vision, and values? Will it take a chunk out of or move us closer to, we like to think of them as kind of milestones towards our mission? Is it scary and exciting? And if we didn't have to add any resources, right? So time, money, people, strategies, would we be able to achieve at least 60 to 65% of that goal? That's a good kind of litmus test to say, kind of, do we know what we're doing, or are we totally living in blue ocean? Because you asked a great question. How do you set big goals? But then the reason people don't set really big goals is because if a week or a month or 2 weeks in that wow, there's no way in hell we're going to do this, what most organizations do is pretend like it never happened, go back to business as usual, and just move on. They completely abandon it, and it's he whose name we don't speak. It just happens to be your goal. So finding that healthy impact or that healthy kind of medium between big enough to be motivating, but not too big to be a pipe dream and kind of deflating or crushing when the reality strikes that's our goal.
Yeah, and you bring up a really interesting thing that psychologically I deal with a lot with the organizations I work with is, I jokingly say, are you designed to fail or not? But there is a whole negative kind of toxic corporate culture around failure when it comes to goals. And you touched on a little sweet spot I'd like you to expand on, which is you are setting goals that you may not achieve 100%, but a lot of corporations have very punitive, negative things around that, which is why they've gone into this kind of contraction paralysis, little itty bitty step thing. Can you talk about how DM has combated that and made sure, because I know you guys did something really cool I wish I'd gotten invited to, and things that you do to make sure that the staff, even if it is a quote unquote fail of the big goal, that you're still achieving and still moving forward?
It's a great question. I think, it all kind of starts with the goal, right? So not just the goal, but the reward. Or the why. I guess let's back it up. So everything starts with the why and understanding why are we setting this goal? What kind of season are we in our business right now? What is going to have the biggest effect or take the biggest chunk out of our mission? Because I think goals can tend to fizzle out or never really get total buy-in if they're not important, if they're not meaningful, or if they're somewhat contradictory to what's happening in the rest of the business. And I think you see this as businesses grow. As organizations get large, then what they really become is several little businesses making up a big business, right? So
Yep.
If you're not careful, you can get misalignment in goals or almost an unhealthy rub. So you get one department or one org within an entire company setting a goal that's either contradictory or somewhat competitive to a goal that another org sets. So I think the first thing in goal setting is theming. So theming and understanding what area of focus are we going to look at for our goal setting? Like what's going to have the biggest impact on our business? And then kind of the next step after kind of theming your goal is defining uncomfortably achievable. So that's where we live. At DigitalMarketer, we live in goals that are uncomfortable but achievable. And for us, what that means is tomorrow we would have the resources to achieve 60 to 65% of the goal. So without acquiring additional funding or budgeting, without acquiring additional people, time, or without having to go out and figure out additional strategy, right? So we're looking to set goals that are anywhere from 3 to 6 months that that are uncomfortably achievable, meaning we can achieve 60 to 65% of that goal with the resources we already have. Now, the next step for us, and I would recommend for anyone listening to this call, and kind of going back into the pitfalls, is establish our assumptions. So you're going to make some assumptions. Everyone does in goal setting. Now, as a company gets larger, you'll get people making assumptions that own particular metrics or divisions or are there representing a particular department. If they don't say this is an assumption or this is a rough estimate, the assumption is this is fact. It's very important to identify what is an assumption or anything less than concrete fact, because goals fail when they're built on a basis of mistruths, right, or shortcomings. If you say, I believe that we're starting at X, and that's not the case, and you're basing your growth or your goal off of that particular metric or off of some leading or lagging indicator of that metric, then it's not that your quote-unquote goal failed. You may still achieve the desired growth percentage, right, or reduction percentage, depending on where your goal is. But if you're not going in and saying, these are assumptions have to be validated, then you're going to likely fail even if you actually do all the hard work. And I'll tell you, when you fail, it'll be deflating to your team. It'll alienate one person or one department. And now you have failure plus mistrust in a team. And it almost doesn't matter what your next goal is. After that one, you're stuck. You guys are in just a tailspin of no teamwork. You're in a place of failure of communication and name calling. Goals can be so big in organizational momentum, or they can be so detrimental to trust and teamwork, right? And really establishing assumptions are a great way to ensure that they're pushing you in the right direction, not dragging you down. So for me, I think once you're hitting those points, and then really establishing kind of how are we measuring, and not just measuring kind of that lagging indicator, those lagging metrics, but also identifying that North Star metric. What is the one thing that we're going to influence, right? What is the North Star one thing? All of this goal is focused around this one area. And then what are the leading indicators that we can influence that will likely give us the result we want for this North Star metric?
So I want to put a really sharp pencil point on what Richard just said and just re-emphasize. I go into and have worked in 50 different business sectors, and I can't tell you how many times I look and the strategic plan, the goal setting, there are no assumptions. It just says goals, actions, schedules. And the larger your organization is, the more important those assumptions become, because as an engineer, I'll geek out and say they become exponentially dangerous the more wrong they are as they move up the chain into the organization. So I love that you said that. And talk to us a little bit about leading indicators, Richard, because I think everybody gets the lagging thing, but how do you know that you're really in a leading indicator? What are those things that you as an organization do as digital marketer that make sure that you're not just measuring what's happened versus pushing forward?
Yeah. So leading indicators are one of the most difficult things to figure out, right? Because if we go in and we define them, and we didn't define them, we really kind of followed the 4 disciplines of execution. It's an amazing book. And when we're going in and we're looking at setting goals and reverse engineering those goals, and then even modeling those goals forward, we kind of follow that process. So leading indicator, they have to be influenceable, right? They have to be influenceable daily. Someone has to be in complete control over them. So what are the 3 to 5 things that someone could do per day to influence that North Star metric, that WIG, that whatever acronym or whatever vocabulary you're using? But I'll tell you, in goal setting, this is the thing that's the hardest to figure out. So if you are trying to, let's say you're in a SaaS model, right? You're in a SaaS industry, and for this particular goal, you're looking at MRR growth. So you want to increase monthly recurring revenue. Then you're going to have to track all the way back and say, what's our North Star metric? And you may say, for us, our North Star metric is trials, because if we increase trials, then we know our trial rollover rate, and trial rollover rate will increase membership. So new members will go in there. And while that's new revenue and not expansion, it's definitely one way to look at it. Then the next question you would say is, once you've found that North Star metric, is what is everything we currently do to influence trials? And then you ask that question again. So you could say, well, we run Facebook ads to this white paper, or to this template pack, or to this webinar. Okay, now who runs the Facebook ads, right? What's your cost per trial? What needs to happen every day? How many views need to happen on that ad? How many clicks on that ad? How many people need to see that landing page? And you can reverse engineer it all the way down to an action. Now, then determining which actions are held by individuals and which actions are held by departments and how do you roll it up is a whole nother thing. I believe that you ought to look at your leading indicators like a compressed P&L. So to me, I have 5 divisions that report into me. I want to see the top 2 to 5 leading indicators for each division on one document, like a compressed P&L. As long as they're green, then I get to move on. If they're not, then I'm going to expand that department's kind of metrics a bit. And as I expand down, it goes from departmental to individual all the way down, from category to specific all the way down. So your leading indicators should say, if I were only to look at 3 to 5 metrics a day that would influence, what would they be? If I could look at something and say, do I believe that we're generally on track towards staying exactly where we're at or losing ground? What are those 3 to 5 metrics? And again, this is the hardest thing in the world to figure out. But once you know it, you'll know the actions that everyone in your organization needs to take in order to achieve your goal. And I think that's the secret, right? Doing the hard stuff and figuring it out, even after you've set the goal, if it's uncomfortably achievable, if it is a goal worth achieving, even if you were to fail in the goal, would the results still be worth celebrating? You can check all those boxes, but then not give people a roadmap to achieving the goal, or not give them a scoreboard or tell them how they're going to be measured, or highlight the activities that are most likely to lead towards the success of the goal, and you'll still fail organizationally.
And I love what you said in the word scoreboard. If you, as a leader of an organization, aren't clear on those leading indicators and what the scoreboard is, that makes it so much more challenging. And flipping over just to the concept of failure, when you fail, you don't know where you failed or how you failed or what part broke down or where to do any kind of root cause discovery to achieve that goal. And so stepping into that whole failure thing, you told a great story in a blog post that I just loved around your team didn't achieve one of the goals, and what did you do to get them back and re-engaged and keep them in the game? What works for your culture to make sure that achieve or not achieve, people stay accountable, in action, and moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, after you miss, everyone's tendency is to sandbag the next goal. And I'll tell you, we sandbag it either internally or publicly or organizationally, and we tend to kind of hide it or categorize it as team morale, which is a thing, right? Momentum is a thing, but morale is never achieved by some pedestrian goal. Never. Morale is achieved by setting big goals, knowing how to keep score, and being honest about what happens and why. And again, if the goal was big enough that if you miss, the results achieved will be worth celebrating. And everything starts there. Like, we have to do business with the past. And that means celebrating first, acknowledging our failures and shortcomings second, taking the next step and saying, and here's how we've learned from those, but then moving on and saying, here's the next goal. And it's either equally as big or bigger. You have to avoid the urge to go backwards. And instead of sandbagging, you have to find a healthy way to learn from that failure. The gift of hindsight is an amazing gift. So I have a list of questions that I ask after a failure. In fact, I typically ask them after success or failure, but they were written in order to help our teams deal with failure and to have that energy, to have that confidence to move on and set that next goal. So maybe I can share those with you guys.
I was just about to ask, and I was hoping you would, because I figured that would come back in our Q&A as I do an Unfiltered Friday, and I figure someone will listen to this one and say, Richard, would you mind sharing those questions? So
great. Well, there are 8 questions.
Nice.
And I'm sorry, were you gonna? You seemed like you had a question, and I totally cut you off.
That is totally okay. I'm going to let you finish what you were saying, because I was actually going to make a request also for our listeners on this call, which finish what you're saying, and then we'll go right into that little last request before I let you off the hook today. All
right. So before I give you the questions, I'm going to give you kind of my philosophy and some of my my thoughts in and around questions. When I kind of first inadvertently stepped into a leadership role, or a management role, I thought that being a leader or being a manager meant always having the answer to the question. And that was obviously always having the answer to any question. And that was obviously a flaw. That was a flawed way of thinking. That was just incorrect and wrong. Then, as I kind of matured a little bit and said, you know what, I was wrong, the next thing that I came to was also wrong. But I thought, being a leader or being a manager means always getting the answer to the question for the people that you're charged with leading or managing. And then when I finally, I think, not only was able to break through and not be a great leader, I think I'm a much better manager. I think I'm a much better leader, but I truly believe that I'm able to lead people and enable them to lead others now. And I believe one of the biggest breakthroughs in achieving that was the acceptance that being a great leader, or even a good leader, is about asking the right questions that lead to the answer. And in most cases, even if you know the answer, it's even about asking the right questions. So for us, I put a huge emphasis on what questions can I ask that will help people get to the right answer, or to help us figure out the question maybe that we actually need to be asking, or where we need to be looking. So here are the 8 questions that I ask after a failure, or after any goal miss or victory at this point. The first question is, if we didn't set this goal, where would we be today? Right? Because in every failure or success, there are successes that you've forgotten about, that at the time they happened, they may have been big, they may have been small, but they happened. And in a day, they may have seemed minuscule. At the end of a 3-month or a 6-month or a 12-month goal, if you were to add them together, they would be impressive, to say the least. So for us to do business with the past, we have to start from an area of success within failure, right? So if we didn't set this goal, where would we be today? And I think that's around, what would the business look like? Because now we've lived in this goal, like it's been the defining kind of mission or vision for some or all of the company. And every day we woke up, and if we've done it correctly, we're trying to influence this goal. We're trying to achieve it. We're trying to affect change. What if we weren't? What if we'd picked something else? Where would we be today? What would our customers say about the business that we have, right? Would we have as many customers? Would we have as many leads? What would our sales team look like? What would marketing efforts look like? What would this company, from a very real standpoint, look like today had we set a different goal? So that's question number 1. Question number 2, what decisions did we make because of the goal that we might not have made without it? So along the way, if this truly is a goal, and for us, again, back to the 4 disciplines of execution, it's a WIG. It's a wildly important goal. So this is the goal that, layered with our mission and our core values, we check against to say yes or no. So decisions were informed by the setting of this goal. And what decisions did we say yes to, and what decisions did we say no to, because this goal was chosen. And that's important. You'll start to see breakthroughs. And just to clarify, when I ask these questions, I ask them in written form, and I don't ask anyone to send me their answers. We read them aloud as an executive team, or as a leadership team, or as a individual kind of team, depending on the size of your company or your organization or your department or division. We read these aloud and share the answers, every person on the team, so that we can kind of account for the past. And I'll tell you, whether you're a team of 3 or 4 or 10, you'll be amazed at the things that you did or the decisions that you made that you've completely forgotten about. Okay, number 3, how have we become better as a company, as leaders, and as individual contributors because of this goal? See, all of these questions are meant to point out success within failure, right? Success within failure because it exists, and if we just focus on failure, we're doomed to repeat it, or our confidence has to take such a hit, or we're just delusional narcissists. I can speak for one of us on the call. That's a struggle that he may deal with. I don't know if that gives you any indication as to where that is.
All of us who hold leadership positions may occasionally fall into the delusional narcissist category.
So there you go.
You're just calling us all out, Richard. It's okay. Everybody on this call felt a little like, eek at that. And it was well-deserved for all of us. So
when we're amongst friends, we can smell our own. There you go.
We amongst friends here.
But you have to be very careful when you're dealing with, in some cases, young companies, in some cases, young leaders, in some cases, young individual contributors, and in some cases, people who aren't quite sure, maybe this is their first failure. Maybe it's their first success. No one, it's amazing. You look in the eyes of people who are there for the first time, whether it's success or failure, and you start to realize that they honestly have no idea what's going to happen next. They've seen enough movies and TV shows that highlight either amazingly great bosses or amazingly terrible bosses. So we're either going to have $100 bills rain from the ceiling or everyone's getting fired, but likely nowhere in between. So as we start to ask these questions, we start to make people account for the past and acknowledge the successes within failure and start to build the confidence and start to see, while we may not have reached the desired end result, the full goal, we're better off for it. But now we have to start pivoting a little bit, right? And starting to say, okay, if that's all the good, what about the bad? And really pivoting to the bad from why did it happen? Because a good goal missed should give you a path to achieving a bigger goal next time, right? We have to learn from these failures, not just learning why we failed from the goal-specific standpoint, but why we failed tactically. And that's where these next few questions start to focus. So the fourth question is, what assumptions did we make in backing into our goals that were just flat wrong? Sometimes you were just wrong on those assumptions and you either didn't verify or you verified, but you were wrong. So did we basically think that we were starting one place and now we're starting at another, right? Or maybe the assumptions were timeline. Doesn't matter. What assumptions did we make? And when you're asking these questions, try not to qualify the way that I'm qualifying when I'm explaining them. Half of what you'll get is in the broad nature of these questions. So what assumptions did we make in backing into the goals that were just flat wrong? Number 5, what did we say we would get done, but didn't or didn't in time? This is a big kind of gut check. Sometimes we don't follow through on our commitments. And if we don't acknowledge them now, the people in the room don't go, oh, thank God no one noticed, I'll never do that again. It kind of is a habit that's now rewarded, or at least it's not disciplined or made to feel awkward. So I want to acknowledge, whether it's myself or anyone on the team, this is when we say, if we're going to do business with the past, we're going to be really, really honest about it. Because if you're sitting in a room full of people who have the ability to affect your business, you shouldn't believe that any of them are just inherently bad or liars, right? They have the best of intentions. So we need to figure out why these things didn't happen. My guess is they didn't wake up this morning and say, you know who I don't like? Elizabeth. You know what I'm not going to do? What I said I was going to do. Right. There. They're not that malicious. No one's that hateful. But there are things at play, assumptions that maybe we didn't make around their workload or their time, or maybe there are intercompany communication issues, or that a plethora of things that if you don't ask this question, you won't start to drill down to some other issues within your company that you need to fix that'll pop up again and again and again, no matter what category your goal falls into.
And I know some of the folks on the phone, you know who you are, might have a kill the messenger approach to management and goals and failure. And I'd like to invite you, as Richard goes into the next few questions, to drop that today. Because when your employees learn that you kill the messenger, you do not receive critical information that Richard's talking about right here with this conversation.
Yeah, it's such a great point. So for us, facts are just that. They're facts. We can choose to not like them, but they're not really worthy of praise or hatred, right? They are just facts. The actions that led towards influencing numbers or outcomes, that's where we focus. So for us, making something just a third-party inanimate object, whether it be a fact or a goal, it's something that we can speak to unemotionally and factually, and then say what influenced that. And I'll tell you, if there's that kill the messenger, it's likely, or kill the messenger culture in your company, it's likely because you've emotionally attached too much to the metric or to the goal, not the action that leads to it. So is there a way to emotionally separate yourself from the reporting structure, right? From the scoreboard, not the actions that lead to the scoreboard, if you think about it in any sports game, at the end of the game, the coach doesn't stand out in the field or on the court shouting at the scoreboard operator.
Yeah.
Why? Why would you put that up there? I really wanted that to go the other way, because the scoreboard operator is just checking by. I mean, he's just 1, 3, 6, whatever the number is, he's just adding it in there. Don't fall into the kill the messenger. And the way that you do that is you need to emotionally separate yourself from that initial kind of KPI, that initial reporting structure, and then learn to ask questions based in and around what actions led to this, or what inaction led to this, and really allow the emotion to get involved there, but still try to kind of restrain a bit of emotion. So
definitely.
Side tangent.
That's all right. And sorry, did we leave off on 5?
we did leave off on 5.
Okay.
What did we say we would get done, but didn't in time? So that last or didn't in time kind of leaves a little bit of an out, right? Because if we're going to be honest with ourselves, and we're going to be honest with our peers, and we're going to be honest with the people that we report to, we need to have sometimes a bit of an out that can say, I got it done. I just didn't get it done when I said I would. Here are all the reasons why, but not getting that done by this date didn't allow us to do these things by that date. So that's big. That's an accountability thing. And also accountability, and it's also team building. It's also, what's going to happen if you admit failure? Because if you can't deal with failure within your team, right? If you can't deal with someone failing in a positive fashion, in a way that acknowledges why they failed and enables them to do it differently in the past, doesn't mean that you can't have disciplinary kind of actions, or maybe they're not allowed to participate in the same way. But if you react viscerally and in a negative way to someone failing publicly on the individual level, no one in your organization is going to feel like they can fail on a bigger level.
And
right?
It's so important that everyone hear what you just said, because when I get called in to help out, I promise you, every one of your employees remembers exactly how you acted during a failure. Whereas when you're just celebrating a success, everything's cool. But it is our limbic brains that cause us to remember that pain point. So you as a leader, such a great point, Richard. So I wanted to put an exclamation point on that. They will remember how you react to the failure.
Yeah, a couple of things to think about there. I forget who told me this, and there's probably a quote out there or something, so I'm going to do a terrible job if I try to sound smart and quote it. So I'll just tell you the way they told me. They said, when everyone else is screaming, people are drawn to the one whispering, right? So when everyone's freaking out, they're looking around going, okay, that person's still freaking out. I'm not going to follow them. That person's still freaking out. I'm not going to follow them. Like, think about it. If it's a fire in your office today, wherever you're at today, and everyone stands up and starts freaking out and waving their arms in the air, it's on fire. Are you going to go, that person obviously has a good plan, I'm going to follow them? Or are you going to look around and look for the one person that's calm, getting their stuff together, starting to get people, and leading them down a path to safety, right? So what do you do when things go wrong? Are you the person standing on your desk, jumping up and down like a 2-year-old, screaming because something didn't go right? Or are you calmly analyzing what happened, coming up with a plan to either get things back on track or to completely change that plan? Sometimes as leaders, the first skill we need to learn is how to not react. Even if inside we are jumping up and down on our desk like a 2-year-old and screaming. What are you doing on the outside?
Yep. And it's funny, we have a podcast topic coming up in about 4 weeks on that exact topic, is when the crap hits the fan, how do you keep your smart brain engaged and keep the 4-year-old off your desk?
There you go. I love it. I can't wait to listen to that one. Okay. Next question, question number 6. What did we do that worked as well, if not better, than we expected? Right? This is to give us an indication and to help us as we're forecasting moving forward. Because really, a good executive, a good leader, a good manager should be able to forecast, not just forecast and project financially, but what projects or what strategies should yield. And the better we get at doing that, the better we can not only plan and project, but we also know where to put our faith in things. We also know to say, I think this one's going to do a little bit better because last time this happened. So I honestly believe if we give that more resources, it'll really pay off in this goal sprint or in this time. So what did we do that worked as well, if not better than we expected, is a critical question. Now, number 7, were we looking at the right leading indicators for this goal? So a lot of questions, or you should start to see a path for not only confidence after failure, not only acknowledging wins after failure, but by now it should start to see there's a reason why we failed. Maybe we failed because we made incorrect assumptions. Maybe we failed because we said we were going to do something by a certain date and we didn't. Maybe we failed because we were looking at the wrong leading indicators. What if any one of those things were true? Should you be walking around with your head hung low and moping around the office, or should you say, man, if we'd only been looking at the right things? But we set a big enough goal that the movement was noticeable. This had an impact on the business. Like, we should all be proud of this, and we know why we failed, so next time we won't. So were we looking at the right leading indicators for this goal? Now, the last question that I ask is, if we knew then what we know now, what would we have done to achieve this goal? Now, you can have an alternate question there if you'd like, and that's, if we knew then what we know now, would we have committed to this goal? Right? Would we have committed to this goal? So would we have basically said, yep, we're going to do that? Would we have made it bigger? Would we have focused elsewhere? Or would we have just hit it? So those are the 8 questions that we ask. And again, it used to be after failure. And if you go through them and start to say, what were the roles of each of these questions, you'll see the roles were to acknowledge why we failed, to acknowledge what went wrong or what went right in failure, and then to reframe before we move on to the next, to reset and reframe before we move on to the next goal. Asking these questions will give your team confidence to move on and set a bigger goal, and allow them to point out failure immediately after it happens, and to adjust those strategies to ensure you're not taking those same failures with you to the next goal.
Nice. And Richard, I really want to thank you for those 8 questions, because I promise all of you on the line today and listening to this podcast that if you do nothing else but start using those 8 questions, and I promise I'll figure out something neat, snazzy, and with Richard's smiling face on it to share with you all so you have them handy, you will take out of this podcast something that will ensure that your organization, whether it's a year old or 126-year-olds, stays in not just existence, but successful. So Richard, I always say we end these podcasts with giving them something to do. And I think you just did, but I'm going to let you brilliantly phrase it yourself, as if there's one thing they do when they leave this podcast that's going to ensure that from this day forward, their goal setting produces the results and expectations they have as an organization, what would it be?
So I'll tell you, I think those questions that we just went over are great to ask post-goal, right? But what do you do now? It kind of depends on where you're at. So if you're moving towards a goal, or at least you believe there's a goal, I'll tell you, the email that I would send right after this podcast to your team would be, I'd write an email subject line, hey, quick question. What do you think the 3 to 5 biggest indicators are for us achieving this goal, and what role do you play in them? Looking forward to hearing your response. Talk soon. And if you sent that to everyone on your team and they're all over the place, then maybe you shouldn't wait to ask some of those questions until after you hit or miss your goal, because there's a really good chance that everyone's moving towards something else, or they're kind of hoping they hit the goal, but they're not quite sure what they're doing in order to ensure that.
I love that. And especially because I know a lot of our listeners are organizations that have divisions, and we can all admit a few silos here and there. And that will be an instant indicator for all of you to know where it's at and where to go on your goals. So with that, Richard, thank you so much for a great podcast today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you everyone on the call. And of course, remember, Unfiltered Friday's coming up. So if you have any questions on the podcast, feel free to shoot us those questions and we'll answer them on Unfiltered Friday. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you for listening to Your Corporate Shrink podcast. You can engineer human, and you can engineer leaders. With your host, Elizabeth Frisch. Find Elizabeth and her team at yourcorporateshrink.com.